T. Clark here, and this video is about the written response 3C on the create performance task. So 3Cs tells us to capture and paste two program code segments that you developed during the administration of this task, containing a student-developed procedure that implements an algorithm used in your program and a call to the procedure. Okay, the first program segment is that procedure or function or method that the procedure has to define, or you have to have the name, obviously, and you don't need a return type, but if there is a return type, you talk about that. It must contain and use one or more parameter that actually has an effect. So not just a worthless parameter that does nothing, but a parameter that actually helps the function work and the program work. And it must implement an algorithm that includes sequencing, selection, and iteration. So sequencing just means code in order, so that's basically given. But selection means you must have an if statement, and iteration a loop of some type, like a for loop or a while loop. And I think they're trying to say that the control for that loop does not count for selection. So you have to have a separate if statement as well. And it's just good to have, and you can talk about it separately as well. Okay, then the second code segment must show where your student-developed procedure is being called in your program. So if you're using a built-in procedure or a built-in language structure, such as an event handler, so your event handler is not going to count as your procedure or function. So it must be student-developed, so your event handler can call that procedure, but it should be a separate procedure that is being called. Okay, so then the written response, the prompts are to describe in general what the identified procedure does, and how it contributes to the overall functionality of the program. So what does it do, and then how does it help the program? And then explain in detailed steps. So here's the detailed steps on step 4. So most students get this right, but then they forget to talk about step 3. What's the overall purpose of it? They get right to the detail. The detail is in step IV. I renumbered them to because Google Sites does not let me use Roman numerals, but number 4 says how the algorithm implemented in the procedure works, and you must, the explanation must be detailed enough for someone else to recreate it. So this is where you go basically line by line explaining what's going on with your code. Okay, that's for the scoring. Scoring for 1, 2, and 3. If you have the two program segments, they have the procedure with a parameter and it's being called in part 2. And you're describing what the overall purpose of the procedure does and how it contributes to the overall functionality of the program. Okay, so it must be student developed, but you could develop this collaboratively with a partner. So if you're on scoring for part 4, you do not get a point. Oh, what happened? If the response only describes what the selected algorithm does without explaining how it does it. Wait, this is scoring 5. I might have to redo this slideshow. Oh, I went too far. Okay, so scoring row 4. My bad. So for scoring point 4, you do not get the point if the code segment is not included. So if you don't include the code, the grader is not going to go look for your code. So you have to include the code. And again, code segments are pictures. So you have to save it as a JPEG or PNG or whatever file the digital portfolio requires. You do not get the point if the procedure is a built-in or existing procedure, like we said about the event handler, or if it's something that's already created, like the min or the max functions. Those are already pre-made, so it's not what students make. So even if you're calling it in part 2, just calling a function does not count. It has to be calling your function. And you have to make sure you have the name, the return type, and the parameters. So you might have a great algorithm in a event handler or in the main method, but you should be taking a procedure and putting it in a self-contained procedure area, function defined, or wherever you do that with whatever language you're using. And make sure if you don't get a point if your response describes what the procedure does without relating it to the overall function. So again, that's what I'm talking about. So the detailed part is for scoring part 4 or part 5. So scoring row 5 is a detailed part. Scoring row 4 is what's the purpose of the function? What does it overall do with the program, generally? Okay, so part 5, you have to have the code, obviously. It has to have sequencing, so code order basically is given. It has to have an if conditional, and it has to have iteration. I don't know if a try exception will work. It might work, but it's best to just have an if, maybe if else. That's the best way to get that point. So if you're using a procedure that calls other procedures, that's fine, and those procedures can be considered when they score it for the if there's an if statement in a separate procedure that's being called, or if there's a loop in a separate procedure that's being called from that procedure. So you can have a main procedure and then sub procedures as well. That's fine. And then obviously the written response, like I've said 3 times now, explain in detailed steps how the program works, how the algorithm, how the function works, not the program, my bad, how the algorithm works, how that procedure works. Okay, so if you didn't get the point in row 4, you can still get the point for row 5. So again, that's because probably you may have forgotten about the third one, what it does for the overall functionality of the program. Okay, row 5, you do not get the point if the response only describes what the algorithm does without explaining how it does it. So step 5 is the how. How does this code work? You do not get the point if the description of the algorithm does not match the included program code. So if you're talking about some other code, don't be fancy. It's easy to tell if you're writing about some other code that doesn't match the code that you put in the box or the picture you uploaded. Okay, you don't get the point if the code segment is not included. So if you don't have any code at all, you don't get a point. So you might have a great explanation, but if you forget to upload that picture, both pictures for 1 and 2, then you don't get the point. You don't get a point if the algorithm is not explicitly identified. So if you say the entire program or the whole main, or you're not specific saying this function right here, this procedure right here, this method right here, you have to be specific about what you're talking about. And you don't get a point if the use of the selection or iteration is trivial and does not affect the outcome of the program. So if you're just saying if x greater than 3, print hello. Unless it's a greeting app, then you might get away with that. But otherwise, that's kind of pointless. So make sure the if and the iteration are used in the app. And actually, no, might be okay. We'll see. So 3C, written response. Look through the requirements of the procedure. My hints would be make sure you have one function that includes a parameter, a loop, and an if statement. Okay, so you have to talk about what and how. This is what I've been talking about a lot. Part 3 is about what is going on, and part 4, prompt 4, is how you do it. There's some specific language in there, and then a checklist. Okay, so let's do it. So I have my code. My function I want is, let's see. So I could use initialize course, but it does not have a parameter. So it has some good code here that I used in the previous response where I have a for loops, I have if statements, if else, else ifs. So that's good, but it doesn't have a parameter. So because it doesn't have a parameter, it's not going to work for me because the for part C and more in part D, it has to talk about how it works with different parameters. So that's not going to work. Robot start, I didn't really talk about robot start in my video, so I'm not going to do that. Well, I'm going to go back up and I'm going to say that draw box. Okay, there we go. I have a draw box procedure. It has a bunch of parameters, and the parameters change it, right? The X and Y change where it's at. Width and height change what size it is. And C is the color, like gray or white or black or whatever. And then it has some code. It has an if statement, whether to fill it in or not. So it's the same if statement to begin fill or end fill or not. And then it has a loop. It's kind of a trivial loop, but it's still a loop to draw a side of a rectangle, 2 sides of a rectangle, then 2 sides of a rectangle. So that's still a loop. Like if I was going to do a square, it'd be a loop of 4, and I could get rid of these 2 lines. So I think this will do it. It might be, I might not get the point because it has this loop is only 2 points. But my other code down below doesn't have either loops or if else's. Okay, I was thinking I could call initialize course. That could be my procedure since it calls draw box. But the one I want to talk about is the one that has parameters. So if I was talking about initialize course, since it doesn't have parameters, that's not going to be the procedure I'm talking about. So I'll just say I want to talk about draw box. So I'm going to use draw box as my box. Let's get a screenshot. Control or Windows Shift S. I want to box up all my code. And I like having the first comment as well, even though it's trivial draw box. Okay, so there's my code segment. Then my call is down. I already was using it before in that. Okay, so there's my call. Box it up, screenshot it. Okay, looks good enough. Paste it in there. Okay, so right now it's pasting and it's a smaller text. I might want to redo that. So I'm saying, okay, I might want to say this should be that long, maybe. The problem is that they need a picture. And if I have it like this, the text is small, so I don't know what they're going to do with that if I do a screenshot of my code in here. Because this might be 10-point font. Yeah, this is 12-point. Let's see what 10-point is. Yeah, it looks like 10-point. Okay, so that looks good. So just be aware that it has to be legible. I think maybe I'll just get rid of the 97. I'll get rid of that extra line there, and then I can make it larger. Oh, too large. So again, you want to have your code legible. It shouldn't be super small. So maybe I'll just do it again, Control Shift S, and box it up without the line number. And if you already had the image before, you can do it same image. Okay, so there we go. But again, this is going to be uploaded as an image, so if you just paste it into Paint, then that should be good. Okay, so let's do the written response. Written response, describe in general what the identified procedure does. Okay, so what does this procedure do? So I want to use the procedure name, draw box. We'll draw a rectangle at a specified position with a specified size. Okay, these are the parameters, right? I have the X and Y, height, width and height, and then the color. Okay, so it contributes to the overall functionality. So using some of the words from the prompt. So what's the purpose of my program? It's to draw that robot layout. So the purpose is to draw one box of that layout. Okay, so by drawing a box on the grid so that the full grid is composed of many boxes that the robot can traverse over, getting goals for gray boxes. So I'm going to talk about the color there. Or crashing into a wall for black boxes. So the overall purpose of draw box is draw one box, and it will draw 25 boxes, and then there'll be different colors. So that looks good. Okay, so part 4, explain a detailed step. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to say draw box first creates a turtle object. Okay, so I'm looking at the code again. So first creates a turtle object, painter equal turtle. Okay, creates a turtle object called painter with it hidden line size. I think it was 3. Line size 3. Yep. What else? Instant movement. So that's a speed 0, and goes to the coordinates from the parameters, I think it was just X and Y. Yeah, X and Y. Then what does it do? So it set up the turtle, set up the position, the size, and everything. Went to X and Y. Okay, so now it does pen down and it starts the fill maybe if it needs to fill, if it's not filled based on the background color. So I'm going to say that. So then it gets ready to draw the box by setting up the fill color. And since it's a up here, fill color is one word, I'll just say fill color one word, and that might be a way to get around some of the word count issues. Is if you have code, just use the code word, and you can combine two words in one. Okay, and then what am I doing? Begin fill and end fill only if, oh, not end fill, pen down. So I'm starting the pen down from the parameter, not from, using parameter C. If C is the same as the background color, in this case white, and again I'm going to use not background color but BG color. I'll save a word. So every saving a word in here there might help you out. What did I say? So white, then it does not. Then it won't fill in the square. So it'll be basically transparent. Even though it looks white, or the square is white, or whatever, you can change it to pink, I guess. It will not, it won't fill in. It'll be transparent, and the robot can walk over it. Okay, so put that down. It'll be the same color as the background, or just be blank or transparent. Okay, so then I'm going to make a new paragraph, and you might want to push tab to make a new thing. And sometimes if you push tab, it does this weird thing where it adds a new row. So all you have to do if that happens is just delete row. Don't delete table, and then delete row. And if you mess up and you're like, oh, delete table, oh no, what happened? Just Control Z, you're good to go. Okay, so if you want tab, just do a couple spaces. That looks good. You don't need to. Don't stress out about having it perfect English grammar. So let's see, what was I? So it started it. Okay, so now I want to do the turtle movement. So then the turtle, painter turtle, moves forward based on the parameters. What is it? Width and height for a rectangle. Width W and C. WH. With 90-degree turns in between. Okay, this is repeated twice. To make a rectangle with a pair of widths and heights for sides. So finally, what does it do? Finally, it takes care of the end fill and completes the shape using end fill and pen up. Finally. Okay, again, double check your spelling and grammar. Okay, you don't need to do everything they recommend. I'm going to ignore that because I don't want that space. In between, I'll use that. I'll accept that. Complete. I'll accept that. Okay, it looks good. I'm going to double check, make sure my, Control Shift C for word count, 110. Well, I got 90 left, 57. Good. So again, it has to be less than 200 words. And again, double check, go back to the scoring guidelines, read through bullet point by bullet point, see if you get the points, see if the decision rules matches your code, matches your written response.